This special is brought to you by the IDC, your partner in development finance.
Gary, I know that you've worked in many exotic African countries. Tell us about infrastructure sharing. Do you think that is one way to breach the barriers when you look at the African continent? And it is also about content at this point. And we know that big multinational news corporations are getting interesting content from Africa, but a mediated version, some would think, are not so much told by Africans.
Yeah, I think the battle for content transmission or the sending of content from one point to another is a bigger challenge in most countries outside of South Africa. And even in South Africa, whether it's to a handheld device or to a television set or to a high-definition television set, of which, particularly in some economic regions like SADC, the Southern African region, it is perhaps growing faster as it is in East Africa. In West Africa, really lagging, and it has much to do not only with the fact that even though the human experience demands that kind of entertainment from time to time, whether it's sitting in a lounge and watching it from a Blu-ray disc or any other format, in the broadcasting environment, I think, I tend to agree with the regulator's view that we think and we understand that in the delivery mechanism over the next 20 years, we think there's going to be a distinct lag. And in particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, for the simple reason that regulatory environments don't speak with one voice, and where regulatory environments are quite active. Let me mention to you that Rwanda, for instance, the city of Kigali is the most networked city in Africa, better than any other city on this continent. You can literally walk there, there's Wi-Fi everywhere, even flat screen televisions linked to Wi-Fi networks. And so very big companies are doing things to try and create the essence of what it is that broadcasting and connectivity and convergence at the end of the day can mean for consumers, even in a fairly small city like Kigali. So there are those that are forward thinking, and certainly those regulatory environments where a lot of thought's going into the fact that content is a right. Whether it's information or entertainment, content is a right. It's not a privilege. And so, for that matter, we think from a television and broadcasting content perspective that what we can do every step of the way is try to improve the regulatory environment discussion at least, try and make it more representative, and whether it's to handheld, and once again also the price points come into it, because what cellular companies are charging for roaming fees in Nigeria would, for instance, make it, or Tanzania for that matter, would make it totally impossible for me to even get 1 second of video content over a telephone line. So, long way to go still.
Exactly, and actually, Peter, you can get involved in this conversation because regulation was mentioned quite a bit by Gary here. With regard, it is about price, it is about the regulation coming to the fore and then being implemented appropriately and adequately over a specific period of time. Give us a glimpse in terms of what we're looking at in the South African scenario.
Well, in the South African scenario, as I think everybody is aware, we've been the regulator's been regulating broadcasting in terms of an analog transmission framework since TV was introduced to South Africa, which means that there were a few channels with a few local content obligations, ownership controls, things like that. We are now facing the digital era, where there are going to be a multiplicity of channels, multiplicity of operators, and we have to ask the question: what is the role of regulation in the new digital era? And that is what the ICASA is preparing it for. We are asking ourselves the questions: is there a need for regulation of advertising in the future, in the digital era? Is there a need for regulation regarding competition in the digital era, or do we need to just give people more licenses so that they can enter the market? Crucially, you mentioned just now that content is a right. We have to ask ourselves, what is the role of intellectual property, given the fact that there are going to be so many channels? There's going to be a huge request for content. Everybody's going to be wanting content. I've got a channel but with nothing on it means that my channel's of no worth. So content and the acquisition of content is going to become a challenge over the next few years, and the authority is very aware of that. And also, very importantly, with the development of community TV channels in South Africa, we also have to look at, well, what sort of local content obligations are we going to impose on the South African broadcasting sector to stimulate the growth in community TV and other TV services in South Africa, as well as what sort of channels or what expectations can we have of the community TV sector in the digital era.
With regards to regulating advertising, we know that one of the drivers behind content is advertising in a sense, because that is what drives revenue in many instances when it comes to broadcasters. Do you think that, and this is something that of course has been in the market since Chomsky of course was talking about the impact of shareholders in advertising within the media landscape. Are we looking at regulations coming to the fore where, you know, regulators far more involved in terms of advertisers and the content that comes out of a channel?
When you look at advertising, it's a very broad question, but there are two aspects here. The one is what you're advertising truthful? And that's what the Advertising Standards Authority regulates in South Africa. And the other is, as a viewer, if my program is an hour long, do I want to watch 30 minutes of adverts and 30 minutes of program, or do I want to watch 10 minutes of advert and 50 minutes of program? And the authority will be focusing on, well, how much time can you have as advertising at different times within the viewership hours of 24 hours a day?
Just to expand on this, I think that the local content question is a crucial question. And I think we have to understand that on two levels. We have to understand it as a supply side question. What do you do to increase the supply of content? But you also have to think of it in terms of the demand side of that equation. I think there's often an assumption that audiences want local content almost irrespective of what the quality of that content might be. There's like this idea that somehow there's just this intrinsic demand for local content that's there. Well, in the same way that you have to supply local content to the market, you also have to stimulate demand. And stimulating demand means there has to be investment in the quality of that content, and the quality of that content will depend ultimately on business models that make that local content viable as well. So the advertising equation is intrinsic to it. Opportunities to ensure that there are channels that are there that actually have a following, that have marketing budget, et cetera. All of that is intrinsic to making sure that the television of the future for the continent is not foreign television that is ultimately shaping the identity of kids that grow up, but that actually has within it a balance, a mix of both local and global content.
How do we really know what the youth of Africa want to see? And what the consumer in Africa wants to see, because at this point, if we just look at the retail trends, for example, it's all about global brands. Can we draw parallels and correlation with regards to the consumer trends and spending, with regards to what content they'd like to see?
Well, I think that question is actually easier in some ways than it sounds, because again, the art of storytelling is not a new invention. I mean, the art of storytelling is ancient, and in cultures throughout Africa, there are many conventions for storytelling that would be very, very live, very vivid, thriving in a way. The problem, though, is that those media, those vehicles for storytelling, suddenly face competition. And this new competition that they face, it's not that the local storytelling is no longer interesting or valid or anything like that, but it's that there's a new demand on time. And television is very, very, very compelling in terms of moving this shift in time of more and more time being spent with that medium. We need a little bit of jujitsu to ensure that as people spend time with the medium, within that medium, there are also opportunities to experience their stories. So we end up with a problem if this shift that happens to this new art form that people find so attractive and compelling, to give it more and more of their time, if our stories are not there, if we're not stimulating that storytelling, then what happens is more and more of that storytelling becomes the storytelling from abroad rather than the storytelling within. And that's the danger ultimately.
And this is why I asked what influence advertisers have, because at the end of the day, you've also got to look at what brings in revenue. So perhaps from a community perspective, you'd say, well, local content is fantastic, but is it bringing in the revenue? Is it something that most news broadcasters ask? Perhaps, Gary, you could tackle this one.
Yeah, I think it also links to the fact that that content generated from communities themselves is a very, very powerful force. And we take the example of the Nigerian film industry, which on a Friday afternoon between 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we have the former chairman of the National Film and Video Foundation here with us. What happened in the Nigerian film industry is that they shoot up to 900 movies per month, and it's a very, very high frequency, and it's almost like a conveyor belt of same scene backgrounds, same scene actors, but very powerful stories. And what the experience on one of the digital platforms across the continent has shown is that those movies are now on a channel, on MultiChoice, for instance, and it's been watched in record numbers, because even though it's low quality, it has the essence of good storytelling. It's movies called Kill the Bride. There's always somebody dying, somebody...
Gary, at least we know what you're doing in your spare time.
There's somebody taking someone's money, somebody owing money, somebody's wife running off, somebody's husband cheating. Those are, so the essence of storytelling, and coming back again to the fact that human beings want to hear and want to see good stories. At the end of the day, what the digital migration is helping is, we know that, for instance, the cost of producing those kinds of productions will come down. The cost of producing, the cost of distribution, all those will come down, and it will create more communities of local content. And how that fits into the new digital platform, whether it's on handheld devices, and once again, whether it's human behavior to sit and watch in an airport building on a small screen this size, an entire movie, I'm not sure. But the one thing I do know is that if it's a good story, I'll do it.
Something I could talk about for hours, but we have run out of time, so I have to end it there, gentlemen. Thank you so very much for joining us. A big thank you to Gary Alfonso from CNBC Africa, of course, Dr. Dwayne Varren from Murdoch University, and Peter Klutzes from ICASA. Thanks so much for joining us.